Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. You're joined today by over 400 of your closest friends as we undertake our third part in a webinar series. This one's entitled Datacenter Avengers Assemble. And we're going to be joined today by, actually, let me talk about what we're talking about here first. This is a subtitle, Even a Hero Needs a Team. So we're joined today by Wendy Pfeiffer, who is the CIO at Nutanix. Wendy, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
I am particularly excited for today's event because we often have, no disrespect intended at all, we often have marketing people, technical marketers, product marketers, and today we actually have a real live CIO. It's always nice to have a different perspective on what's happened in the data center that's in the trenches more than we might see otherwise.
Yeah, we don't actually get out much.
So as I was saying, we want to make sure that you ask lots of questions throughout the event. So use the questions area in the in-expo control panel. And please, if you have a question for Wendy about anything that she's talking about, or just life in general, we want to hear it. And we'll be taking questions either throughout the event or at the end of the event. And at the end of today, we'll be talking to you about the prize for this series. And as you know, for the people who are attending, there'll be a Tango gift card. If you haven't attended a previous one, if you're new to the series, you'll be getting a Tango gift card. And we actually have a special prize at the end of today's event that's not even announced that we'll talk about at the end of the event. And next week, we'll be giving away our grand prize, which is a Microsoft Surface Studio. I use one of these for some video work we do, and they are phenomenal. So I'm really looking forward to giving that away next week. And the next part of our presentation is Wendy, and I'm going to turn it over to you. Wendy, if you need a next, just tell me to hit next slide, and I'll take care of that for you.
Will do. Thank you. Well, it's very, very nice to be on the podcast today, and welcome to everybody who is listening. Hopefully you can hear us by now. I wanted to speak with you today about some of the heroism that we engage in every day in the data center, whether that be our on-premise data centers, hosted data centers, or even in the cloud. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about what I believe that we need as IT professionals in order to save the day. So if we can go to the first slide with content in the presentation, I would appreciate it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about who has your back in the data center. We've got some pretty formidable skills. In my case, I've been in IT for 30 years. I've learned a few things. I've probably, forgotten more things than some of the new folks starting out know. Like you, I've earned my position through some really, really hard times. But it's a really strange world out there today. The hybrid cloud world requires a mix of skill sets and a mix of capabilities that you don't find in any one of the cloud environments on their own. So today I just want to talk about kind of that optimal mix of skills needed to run workloads in a mix of public and private clouds. And I think that at a minimum, to assemble your dream team, you need a group of operational experts, a group of architects and technologists, partners and support, and also portfolio management and people who have mastery of that. And so I just want to break those things down and talk about assembling a powerful team. So if we go to the next slide, let's just start out by talking about operational excellence. Now, this is a starting point that a lot of folks who were born in public cloud don't really understand, but IT's on-premise data centers have really run like well-oiled machines for decades. We have tuned the operational processes, the technologies, and really what we've done is we've created a set of capabilities, tools, skills, operational procedures that in essence compensate for some of the challenges that we face that are introduced to us by third-party vendors. For example, Many vendors have technology that doesn't interoperate well with other technology. Some vendors have moved off of tried and true platforms that we started with, and we're left with legacy equipment that no longer has support. Also, we are often operating in difficult financial conditions, whether we're a startup and we need all that spare cash to build product or to market, or whether we're an established company that has very thin margins. Usually in IT, we're sort of the bottom of the barrel when it comes to budget for improving and for investment. So because of that, we have developed some really spectacular skills around optimization. We know how to optimize space, bandwidth, and energy consumption. We know how to optimize physical and logical access. We know how to build in resiliency for the lowest possible price and how to make some of those compromises. Even then, we might rely on load balancing or maybe redundant hardware if we can afford it. And then also we know how to optimize monitoring and ongoing management. So in this case, we don't monitor for every condition that ever might occur, but only for some very important conditions, or we correlate and only alert on very important events in order to optimize the use of our staffing. The other thing is, over the past decade or so, enterprise IT has also run large-scale operations on public cloud infrastructure. It's interesting when you speak with the marketing folks, they describe the move of enterprise IT to public cloud to be super recent. But in fact, we were doing lots of public cloud work even 10 years ago, and have increasingly moved workloads to public cloud. So we've been doing this for a while, and because of that, we now know how to optimize in public cloud. So, for example, we make sure that we optimize our access to scalable compute or scalable storage resources for things like variable capacity workloads. We optimize performance for edge computing requirements. And then we kind of have this V2 of resiliency, fault tolerance, and self-healing code. Two different paradigms for optimization. Now, the challenge comes, and our newest challenge in IT comes in trying to optimize hybrid operations, operations that are taking place across both private and public cloud. If you just look even at the resiliency challenge, optimizing for resiliency on-premise really centers on load balancing and redundant hardware. Optimizing for resiliency in public cloud centers on writing self-healing code or being able to reconstitute workloads when certain negative infrastructure conditions begin to occur, like a memory leak, for example. So how do you optimize operations across a combination of, a mix of these cloud environments? Well, there are some things that are required. One is a detailed, validated description of the total operational environment. We need to know what we're running where and the capabilities of everything that we're running. We also need administrative expertise at the operating system and hypervisor level for all clouds. And of course, if we're trying to run a lean team, it helps if the operating system and the hypervisor are ubiquitous, are the same. We're running the same OS and hypervisor both on-premise and in public cloud. We also need adaptive monitoring and resource management that spans that end-to-end workflow. And we need, most importantly in the end, people and tools that are capable of correlating conditions across that hybrid environment and then responding in an optimal way. Now, because we tend to come from one tradition or another, we either come from on-premise, private cloud tradition, or we come from public cloud, born and bred there tradition, we tend to have skills and expertise and tools and things like that started out in one of those environments and are optimized for one of those environments. When it comes time to manage ongoing operations in hybrid cloud, this is where we need to search for those skills that we're missing, whether they're on the public cloud side or the on-premise side. And I submit to you that we could certainly build those skills internally, we could hire those skills, but it really, really helps to have people who are experienced in this hybrid mode. If we don't have people who are experienced in this hybrid mode, then we need tools and technologies that span the environments and simplify that operational experience for us. I am obviously from Nutanix. I'm not in sales or marketing at Nutanix. I'm Nutanix's CIO, but I do operate Nutanix's operating system across my very large estate of 6 large-scale on-premise data centers, as well as public cloud operations in Google, in AWS, and in Microsoft Azure. So having that single operating system, that single hypervisor, allows me to focus my team members' skills on operating at that OS and hypervisor level, and then building on things like monitoring, administration, etc., on top of that. And so it's simplifying across the board. Now, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, let's kind of walk into that next dimension. The next dimension that I believe is required on the team is expertise in architecture. And I love speaking about architects, the architects on my teams, the great ones that I've worked with in the past. In my experience, the greatest architects understand the physical and the aesthetic limitations of our systems, our environments, our applications, but they still strive to realize their higher vision for truly performant hybrid cloud architecture. So if we think about that vision, there's a few things that it requires. It requires, first of all, we talked about this before, that single operating system running across all clouds, but the operating system has to have some very important abilities. First of all, because our workloads, because the things we run are not always predictable, we have to be able to dynamically utilize storage, compute, and local network resources. And the dynamic piece is very, very important. Often we'll start out with a specification for some workload that we're going to run, and as technologists we have conversations with business people. Take an e-commerce application, for example, or even more interestingly, an e-commerce application that on the front end is accessed by lots of folks and lots of locations, but in the back end is having to feed into some ERP system that we maintain. And as we speak with whoever wants to launch that application, they give us some estimates. They say, hey, this many, hundreds or thousands of transactions are expected from these locations and with this sort of ramp. And I mean, it's almost predictable that in the end, unfortunately, usually those predictions are incorrect. There are also incorrect predictions that we receive from the vendors who sell us some components. I remember many a time in my journey to Nutanix where I would be working with a combination of vendors who would give me some estimate about the network capacity required for their devices, or the number of servers required to run VDI and a certain set of applications in VDI, or the impact on system resources of a particular process. And in my experience, those predictions are rarely very accurate. And because of that, because of those inaccurate predictions. In the past, we had just sort of one choice in our data centers or in public cloud. That one choice was to over-provision. If we wanted to make sure that we never ran out of, system resources, compute, storage, etc., then we would have to, sometimes even dramatically, if we had very variable workloads, we'd have to over-provision storage, compute, network. At the same time, if we were running in public cloud, we might have to purchase more expensive instances that allowed us to scale without much predictability. So that was sort of the challenge in the past. Doing that, having that dynamicity across a mix of clouds has been, up until this age of hyperconvergence, has been virtually impossible. The second thing that we need in order to have this truly performant hybrid cloud architecture is the ability to create and expand clusters across the entire fabric. So if I have compute resource or storage resource physically somewhere else across my hybrid cloud fabric, I want to be able to address that, to include that physical resource in the mix with a cluster that requires it. And again, in the past, I will say in my experience, without Nutanix in the mix, that has been virtually impossible or very difficult, requiring a lot of tuning at multiple layers. And then the last thing that we need, and this is just a best practice, this doesn't require any vendor in particular, but we need to be able to invoke any infrastructure resource via code. The reason that's important is because there's an element in the mix that we do not control and cannot physically access, and that's whatever it is that we are running in and on public cloud resources. So if we are invoking public cloud resources via code, then we must also, in order to dynamically move workloads and components among resources, even in our private cloud, we must be able to address any of those infrastructure resources via code. This requires a certain skill set, even in our storage experts, even in our network experts, even in our hypervisor experts, etc. We also need a very reliable and modern hypervisor, which is capable of running well and predictably in both private and public clouds, and that also understands that it's running in hyperconverged mode, so it can make optimal use of those hyperconverged resources across the fabric, across the cluster, etc. And again, this is an ongoing challenge with most of even the modern hypervisors today. There's one hypervisor, which is Nutanix's Acropolis hypervisor, that's purpose-built for running in this hyperconverged hybrid cloud mode. And there's a huge difference in my operational experience. I run both ESXi from VMware, and I run Nutanix's AHV in both my private and public clouds in hyperconverged or hybrid mode. And there's a tremendous difference in my ability to access and dynamically assign resources with that purpose-built AHV hypervisor. And then lastly, again, this is sort of good, cleanliness, housekeeping, mom and apple pie, but we really need access to open and available APIs and standards because we need to do some things. We need to integrate both our legacy applications and tools and modern best-of-breed applications and tools. And the rapid pace of change in the technology space will forever, hopefully, well, at least for a long period of time, past my lifetime, I hope, ensure that there will always be technology advances and innovations. I want to take advantage of those things. We also need very, very adaptive and performant use of cybersecurity policies and tool sets across this entire public-private hybrid cloud fabric and across all clouds. first of all, in the cybersecurity space, exploits, issues, challenges, quality of attacks, those things are always adapting, changing, improving, more clever. There's always something new. And then secondarily, this newer notion of continuously operating in hybrid cloud mode means that we need to be able to understand the unique signals that represent an attack that might be spanning multiple clouds but is attacking our environments. Now, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, sometimes when we talk about machine learning, we talk about hybrid cloud, we talk about modern technologies, IT technologists start to feel that maybe our roles just aren't important anymore. However, the key, the base foundation to operating optimally and efficiently in our data centers is to find a way to expose and use the technical and operational expertise of our team members. So this starts with something that's hard for me, it's hard for lots of us in the technology space, but it's super important, and that is that absolutely everything that every team member does must be documented in detail and ultimately expressed as code. This is important because, again, across these various environments, we don't often have the ability to put our hands on the devices. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, depending on where we're running workloads or where we need to swing them. So if we have a best-in-class operational process that works on-premise in our own data center, how can we replicate and extend that process to public cloud, for example? Well, the only way to do that is in code, and the only way to write that code effectively is to ensure that that code is derived from a detailed and accurate description of excellent operational and technical process. We also need adaptive health monitoring and incident management. And what's really important here, whether it's individuals or whether it's code that is monitoring and managing, essentially we need to understand how to recognize conditions as they occur across our environments. So we need to know what normal looks like. We need to know what normal looks like at scale or in rest periods. And we need to understand what an entire efficient workflow looks like. And then we need to be able to understand when normal operations have changed for some reason and understand why they changed, what changed, if that's good, if that's bad. If we don't know if it's good or bad, how can we observe more and respond relatively quickly? All of that I just discussed, this is at the heart of the knowledge base that true IT technologists have already amassed. But now we are having to apply that knowledge in these mixed environments. Every team member needs to become conversant in both writing code and integrating functions, and that's a standard for my team. Sometimes we need help to get from our happy non-code writing state of being to that next step. And there's some actually really nice tools available that kind of build a bridge for people who are not comfortable writing code. My team used some tool sets from a variety of companies, Workato, we use our own COM blueprints, etc. And they just sort of help us to take advantage of best practices, to borrow already existing code sets, etc. Now, if we all were to devote the next year to learning everything there is to know about current technology, it would have all changed while we were devoting our time to doing that. So, figuring out how to future-proof, I kind of don't really like that term, but be relevant, in this hybrid cloud world, even a year from now, it means that every team member has to have the ability to express and access any service or function that she runs as code. There are, many consumer tech companies, machine learning tools, natural language processing. I won't say, hey Siri, or she'll answer all of us. Containerization technologies that are production class today, and they're ready for IT. They're better than the old school enterprise tools that we have, but we need to be able to recognize them, take advantage of them, integrate them, etc. Going to that next slide, and just sort of talking about partners, and this is my sort of second to last point that I want to make. The fact is that it is impossible for any IT team, large or small, to always constantly have access to all of the expertise that we need and to be able to scale that for any situation. So we need to have access to specialists who extend our capabilities. We need sometimes specialized design and planning expertise, or we need to understand how to apply new technologies. We need sometimes just help with implementing, particularly at scale. I am just in the midst of physically moving 3 of my large-scale data centers from one state to another. And that is just a physical process that requires double the resources that I have available on my team normally. Sometimes we need staff augmentation for special projects, and we also need sometimes to work with vendors and partners who can ensure, maybe because of inventory they maintain or special volume purchasing relationships with IT vendors, that they can ensure that we get timely delivery of product shipments when we need them. We also, and I've come to rely on this, sort of the more senior I get and the smarter I think I get, the more I've learned that second opinions and third opinions are priceless to me, especially when large budgets or key business objectives are at stake for me. Ultimately, iron sharpens iron. I know it's a cliche, but it's really, really true. Even the best team needs to consult and train in order to maintain our edge. IT exists, bottom line, to help our companies identify, adopt, and run technology, but partners exist to help us in IT. That's their mission in life. And so knowing that we have those folks in our corner, it's great to call them into battle when we really need them and know that their success is tied up with ours. And then finally, just to move into that last area of the dream team, the group of Avengers who are going to save the data center world. And I love this. I love this whole franchise, the whole Avengers franchise, and this whole notion. But lastly, IT has to have portfolio management, and that means that we need to be able to mix it up. We need a mashup. We need access to a very, very healthy mix of extensible and adaptive technologies. As an example, yes, I work for Nutanix. I willingly use our operating system, our hypervisor, and lots of other wonderful tools and technologies that are included in our software packages. However, I also make use of other vendor technologies, and I love those too. I'm running our operating system on a mix of hardware from IBM, from Dell, from Lenovo. I am using lots of network technologies in the mix from, Avaya and Cisco. Also in my new data centers, I am running a software-defined network from Big Switch, certified to run on our hypervisor. I saved a lot of money. I'm running that on commodity hardware, and at the same time, I now have a network that I can address or invoke as code to meet my standards. We also need to be able to have the ability to ingest new technology or even existing technology via multiple consumption models. If you think about it, right, if I'm running a license on-prem, if I'm running a Microsoft Server license on-premise, I need to also be able to run that Microsoft Server license in public cloud if I'm running in hybrid mode and I want to swing or spread my workloads across those multiple environments. So vendors have to give us the ability to ingest that technology via different consumption models that are associated with the different clouds and operating models. I must have ubiquitous and efficient supportability. I cannot have finger pointing. I cannot have multiple panes of glass, to use the old school expression. Applications need to be portable. First of all, we need to understand that anytime we launch an application, it may run in multiple environments, on multiple devices, in multiple clouds, and I need to be able to run the core applications that I consume anywhere. I must also have access to these specialized skills and resources. And lastly, I need to have vendor choice. That's an IT thing. Ultimately, we care about operational expenses. We care about cost. And there are some vendors who have, in my opinion, very draconian licensing practices. I can think of, vendors who run, an annual or semi-annual audit. For example, I'm just going through my annual audit with VMware right now, and at the end of that audit, I'll get a true-up bill, and I'll have, some decisions to make. Do I change how I'm working? Do I pay an additional fee, etc.? Sometimes it would be nice if I found that the expenses have risen. It would be really, really nice to be able to choose another vendor. Maybe I've always been locked into purchasing one kind of hardware, but I'd like to put another kind of hardware in the mix because it's easier for me to purchase that in another country or another region, or because there's a special deal. So just having that vendor choice is a huge advantage for me. Ultimately, I do have a message for vendors. To support our needs, vendors must understand you will always be part of a custom ecosystem that IT is ultimately responsible to design, adapt, secure, and run. I don't want you to design, adapt, secure, and run it. I'm doing that. That's my job. I want you to understand that you're part of that custom ecosystem, and I want you to be a good citizen, but also understand you're not the whole team. I need vendors to refrain from draconian licensing practices that seek to lock us in over time. You know what? That's not working for us. We're on to you, and we're actively pursuing other opportunities and other models. Vendors need to understand that their design principles and their expressed products, they need to be capable of supporting my preferred mode of operation, which several recent studies have shown that in the high 90th percentage, IT leaders prefer to operate in hybrid cloud because, again, it gives us that choice. And then ultimately, please, folks, please, if my kid can download, a cool, performant, Pokemon Go game on his mobile device and run it without any training and with a better interface and better interaction design than the enterprise application that I deployed that cost me millions of dollars, then you application vendors have failed. I want modern products designed to enable true app portability and the ability to run any service on any hardware in any cloud, which is how I need to operate. So if we bring all of those things together, just kind of in conclusion, if we bring all of those things together and we have at least the ability to reach out to expertise, to help and support in all of those areas, then I think we've got that dream team. And we start to be able to, use those data centers and those cloud environments that we've invested in really not only to enable our companies, but to transform our companies to make use of digital technology optimally. So that's kind of what I wanted to share.
Wendy, thank you so much for that presentation. We do have a couple of questions from the audience if you'd like to take them.
Yeah, I would love to.
So as we think about the public cloud in particular, I mean, how do you use Nutanix Beam? The question is basically how does Nutanix Beam work into play with all of this, but do you use Nutanix Beam internally?
Yeah, I do. I use Nutanix Beam internally, and I mentioned that I operate in multiple clouds. So I have a significant estate in AWS, a significant estate in GCP, and I also have multiple data centers that I run using our software as well. And so, like any other CIO, I am ultimately responsible for managing our costs. And my basic responsibility is to make sure that I'm choosing to run workloads in the most cost-effective and performant environments. And so what I do is I constantly monitor both my usage and the prices that I'm paying, and I make that sort of portfolio management set of decisions. Sometimes on a monthly basis, sometimes on a quarterly basis, I may choose to move workloads because costs are getting out of hand. You know, this is not the fault of any one vendor. Sometimes what happens is our original intent for a workload may have changed. Maybe we didn't expect the volume of usage, or that we didn't expect that it would collect as much data, or that we'd need to store the data for as long a period of time. So as those things start to emerge, I can see those trends. Also, Nutanix on a semi-regular basis has acquired companies, and as I bring those new companies on board, then I need to relatively quickly understand their on-premise and cloud spend, and also help us to understand how to manage those things optimally for the company. And so that's one of my sort of key components in my management dashboard, and that's not quite the right term for it, but my management suite of tools that I monitor all the time to understand costs, and helps me to make vendor decisions, workload decisions, etc. Also, it helps me to provide feedback to some of my team members. A large portion of Nutanix are engineering folks. They are developers. And developers need all the resource that you could possibly ever give them, no matter what, forever till the end of time. And so sometimes we need to have substantive discussions about choices they have in terms of how they are developing that allow us to optimize our use of resources, or maybe move a development activity to a cloud that is more optimally provisioned or priced for that workload.
We have another question. It's around the hypervisor.
Sure.
Let me just make sure I get the right question here. So there's two questions from the same person, and I'll ask both questions because they're similar. One of them is, should companies be concerned about running a vendor-specific hypervisor? And the next one is, to expand, should we be concerned about divergence of VMware, Hyper-V, and OpenStack, and even something like AHV/KVM? What are your thoughts on the state of the hypervisor, I guess, is maybe a way to wrap this up a little bit, and how should companies be thinking about that right now?
Yeah, I can share my thoughts. I don't know if these thoughts apply to all companies everywhere, but I'll tell you what I think. I'll call it 10 years ago, when VMware came on the scene, 10, 12 years ago. This was a revolution in my data centers. I went from, having to sort of maintain very, very complex capacity planning models, to being able to much more flexibly make use of the significant amount of hardware that I was purchasing for my data centers. And so virtualization was a sea change for us in the infrastructure space. However, that's, in my mind, in so many ways, that's kind of so 10 years ago. Nowadays, for me, the hypervisor is a commodity. It's necessary, but what I need that hypervisor to do is I need it to operate optimally with the underlying, I'm going to call it philosophy, architecture of how the system resources are addressed. And then I don't want to have a specialized set of skills, a specialized team that have expensive certifications, in order for me simply to be able to virtualize resources in my estate. That should be much, much less important to me. And so my general philosophy is that, you know, the hypervisor nowadays, a performant modern hypervisor like AHV, is just a part of the combustion engine that runs, you know, the IT vehicle. I shouldn't have to really intensely know how the physics and the engineering of a combustion engine in order to drive the car. I want to be able to focus on that application layer, and I want to be able to drive the car. So I think the key factors, more broadly than whether or not VMware is diverging from OpenStack and whether or not you know, we're operating in mixed mode, is this: is my choice of hypervisor ubiquitous, performant across all hardware types, in all clouds, easily accessible, addressable, updated, modern, maintained, secure, and most importantly, it shouldn't require anything special from me. I shouldn't have to pay for it separately. I shouldn't have to endlessly marshal my usage of hypervisor licenses. I shouldn't have to worry that I might not be able to run a particular workload, or that I might not be able to access particular resources because I have chosen a particular hypervisor. That should become invisible. It should become a non-issue, a non-starter. That's my basic philosophy. I enjoy as much as the next gal talking about standards, but more so than that, it just needs to be part of the combustion engine and not something that I am constantly marshaling my resources around.
And I agree with you wholeheartedly. So it's nice to hear that we're in alignment there. And I think that's all the questions we have. We do have two things before everybody goes, though. Well, actually, three things. One, Wendy, thank you so much for your insight and your presentation this week. This was really good.
Absolutely.
And I believe you said that you are a fan of the Avengers movies, right?
Oh, totally. Big fan.
Same here. In fact, my son and I, he's 15, since the beginning, it's been, for him and I, must-see opening night fare. And we're really looking forward to Captain Marvel and Endgame. Really excited, actually, over the next couple months. And we're going to see who lives and who dies, I guess, in Endgame.
I can't stand the suspense on that.
I know. I'm the same way. We know Spider-Man's coming back because we see the trailers for the next Spider-Man movie, but who else?
Yeah.
So to that end, we actually have a prize this week that we did not announce, and it's going to be $50 Fandango gift cards for 5 lucky winners. And so the idea here is you can go to either or both of Captain Marvel and Avengers. So the 5 lucky winners for this unannounced prize are Han Lin from Texas, Jay Dibble from Ohio, Alex Kropiwanicki from Illinois, I hope I got that right, John McCarthy from Colorado, and Brenda Bell from New Jersey. You'll be reached out to after the event. And also next week, we'll be giving away a Microsoft Surface Studio. These are beautiful devices. So if you have attended this series, any of the parts of the series, you're entered into the drawing, and you are entered into a drawing for each part that you've attended. So next week, at about this time, we'll be giving away that studio, and we'll have the final part of the Nutanix webinar series. This has been a 4-part series that we started in late January, and it's Taking Control of Your Data Center Destiny Part 4, and we'll be talking about eliminating the true-ups and simplifying enterprise licensing agreements, outsmarting the data center mafia. And we're looking forward to that next week. Again, Wendy, thank you for being here. And thank you to our 500 plus viewers for this week's portion of the webinar. Have a great rest of your day.